So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second of RUMA's 5 free webinars in our conference series. So my name is Kat McLaughlin. I'm chairing this session, and I'm chair of RUMA Agriculture. Today's webinar is entitled UK Agriculture, the Global Picture and the UK Position. I'm delighted to be joined today by a great panel of experts who I will shortly introduce. But before I do, there are just a few bits of housekeeping to share. So the structure of the webinar is a panel debate, and we will hear from each of our panelists on a range of topics. We have a packed webinar today in terms of content, but if we do have any remaining time at the end, we'll open the floor to questions. So please put these in the chat function, and if we have time to come back to them at the end, then we can go through them at that point. Cameras and microphones are all programmed to remain off for everyone, so this ensures that only our speakers are seen on screen. Now, I'm joined today by, as I say, a really good panel. We've got Abigail Seeger. Abby is the Chief Executive of the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. We've got Michael Oakes. Michael, do you mind just putting your camera on and just so people know who you are? Hi, Michael. Thank you. Michael is NFU National Dairy Board Chairman. We have Phil Hamling, who is ABP Food Group. He's the head of Corporate Social and Responsibility. Thank goodness I got the acronym right. We've got Richard Griffith, who is BPC's Chief Executive. That's the British Poultry Council. And then joining us from the USA is Janet Helms, who is the Senior Manager of Global Sustainable Sourcing, Animal Health and Welfare for McDonald's. So, as I say, great panel. And first of all, thank you very much for all of you for taking part in this session for us. But before I open the session up to our panelists, I'd like to set the scene for the discussions. So the World Health Organization lists AMR amongst the top 10 threats for global health. Antimicrobial resistance threatens human and animal health and welfare, the environment, food and nutrition, security and safety, economic development, and equality within societies. And according to recent estimates, in 2019, 1.27 million deaths were directly attributed to drug-resistant infections globally. And by 2050, up to 10 million deaths could occur annually. According to a recent report published earlier this year in Nature, antibiotic use in animal farming is expected to increase by 8% between 2020 and 2030, contributing to the global problem of antimicrobial resistance. Lack of publicly available data on antibiotic use and enforcement of regulations make it difficult for governments to address the issue, although efforts to reduce antibiotic use have been pledged by some countries. However, in the UK, we have a very different story to tell, and it's clear that globally, more efforts are needed across both veterinary medicine and human medicine. However, in the UK and throughout Europe, there has been a dramatic reduction in the use of antibiotics in the livestock sectors, as well as funding being made available into researching alternatives, including preventative medicine strategies. The Nature report does predict a global challenge ahead, though. But what we have seen in the UK particularly is the positive impact of a collaborative approach to educating everyone on the responsible use of antimicrobials, which, as we heard last week from the release of the VMD's VARS report, has resulted in a nearly 60% reduction in UK antibiotic sales for food-producing animals since 2014. And this represents the lowest sales to date for the UK. Sales of highest priority critically important antibiotics, the HPCIAs, in food-producing animals also remain at very low levels, at 0.12 milligrams per kilogram in 2022, and account for less than 0.5% of total sales. In addition, the RUMA Target Task Force report, also released last week, charts yet another positive year for UK agriculture in the responsible use of antibiotics, and shows that targets continue to be largely exceeded, met, or are on track, and where use has been needed to address disease outbreaks, these have been isolated and done so in the responsible, effective and efficient manner that the UK is known and recognised for. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm joined by the panel of industry experts, and I'd now like to ask all of them to each explain where they sit in the food chain in terms of helping to address AMR, AMU in the UK or a global perspective. I'm going to pick on Abby first, I think. Abby?
Thanks very much, Kat, and thanks for having me today, and good morning to everybody. Well, in the UK, the livestock industry is responsible for the health and welfare of over 1 billion farmed animals for its care each year and the production of safe and high quality food. And at the VMD, we regulate the veterinary medicines needed for the care of those animals, ensuring that they're safe for the animals that they treat, for the people who administer them, and for the people who eat the food that comes from them. We monitor this through our pharmacovigilance surveillance of adverse events and through our veterinary medicines residues monitoring programme. And our enforcement team follow up on reported breaches of the veterinary medicines regulations to ensure compliance. We also act as the policy lead on AMR issues relating to animal health, both domestically and internationally. Veterinary medicine, like human medicine, needs to be able to rely on access to antibiotics that work. So not only do animal health and welfare depend on it, but so in turn do the food systems that we depend upon. At the VMD, we coordinate and implement the delivery of the UK cross-government 5-year AMR National Action Plan across animal medicines, environment and the food. And but we can't mitigate the risk of AMR by working alone in the UK. And as well as the work we do and other government departments do domestically, we work internationally to mitigate the threat of AMR. One high-profile example of this is the UK's Fleming Fund, which is the single largest investment in global AMR surveillance. And it partners with countries in Africa and Asia and works with global organisations to establish strong AMR surveillance systems, with One Health being a core principle. But we also have a long track record for advocating for responsible antimicrobial use and reductions in the unnecessary use of antimicrobials in animals in other international forums, including G7 and G20. And we're really looking forward to a big milestone next year at an AMR high-level meeting at the UN General Assembly 2024, which will set the ambition for global One Health action on AMR for the coming years. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of how VMD fit into the picture. Thanks, Kat.
Great, thank you. And before I pick on my next victim, I've already made a mistake this morning. So for our audience members, if you want to pose a question to us, if we've got time to answer it, please don't put it in the chat. Please put it in the Q&A session, in the Q&A section. So not the chat. The chat will not be getting looked at all. Okay, Michael, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. So where do you sit in the landscape and the food supply chain in terms of responsible AMR use?
Thanks for that, Kat. Yeah, I'm a dairy farmer, and I also chair the National Dairy Board of the NFU. And I think it's been quite beneficial that the NFU has been key and part of RUMA throughout. And actually, Kat is our head of animal health and welfare and actually chairs RUMA. So there's no getting away from it from where I sit at all. Obviously, I'm either at the start or the bottom of the food chain. It depends how you look at it. And a lot of the progress I think that has been made is working with our customers, our processors. You know, they've been very, very either through the way they price the product. There's been incentives for addressing the owners. There's been incentives for addressing BVD with some purchasers. That alone has actually helped to bring down antibiotic use. If you've got those underlying problems in your herds, you know, you are going to use more antibiotics. At the same time, we've seen massive progress over the last few years on selective dry cow therapy. I think part of our role within the NFU is sort of promote that good practice and using the evidence that's coming out of RUMA and making sure that farmers and vets actually know that the direction of travel. Most dairy farmers actually work quite proactively with their vets. You know, routine visits are a norm, and our annual reviews that we do through Red Tractor is increasingly an important document for us to sort of assess, you know, where we're going on that journey as individual farmers, as well as, you know, we have to do a herd health plan underneath Red Tractor. And I guess probably 8 or 9 years ago, they were a document that sat on a shelf and it was produced when the auditor turned up. Now, increasingly, more and more, we're using them proactively alongside our vet to actually manage risk and manage antibiotic use. There's always issues. Probably 8 years ago, I would say some vets weren't as bought into it as they are today. And I had farmers that go along and ask their vets about the critically important antibiotics, and they were still encouraging them to use that. That has changed massively. I can't remember the last time I ever had one used on farm, and you certainly wouldn't find one in any farmer's medicine cabinet today. So we're on a journey. I'm really quite proud of where the dairy industry is going. As I said earlier, selective dry cow therapy is now almost the norm. That was a massive win, probably one of the low-hanging fruits that helped to reduce antibiotic use quite dramatically when rumour started. But and farmers are pretty engaged in it and alongside their vets. So I think it's really quite a positive story.
Great, thank you. Phil, do you like to go next, please?
Thanks, Kat, and thanks to Rumour for the invitation to speak today. I like to think that Michael's position is probably the most important position in the supply chain. I wouldn't like to say at the bottom of the food supply chain, certainly not in this context. But just to say that for those who might not be familiar with ABP, we are ostensibly a food business, principally in the UK. We process beef and lamb, over 20% of the beef kill, and just under 20% of the sheep kill. And we supply major retailers as well as the domestic wholesale markets, as well as meat products for export as well. It's a family-owned business. We have 17 sites in the UK, 14 primary processing, which includes retail packing, frozen meat products, serving, as I say, a variety of markets. I think just answering your question of what our role is in this space, Kat, I mean, we are essentially a food company. We do have some integrated operations through blade farming, of course, which is part of the ABP group, but we are principally supplied by many thousands of independent beef and sheep producers up and down the country, and we work really closely with those, obviously, to help promote rumour principles within on-farm use. But it is also true to say that we respect the importance of the integrity of the vet-farmer-led relationship when it comes to applying those responsible principles on farm, and we'll play our part in helping to first of all promote the dissemination of that vet-led best practice and encourage farmers to manage animal health and welfare in accordance with a proactive herd and flock health plans, just as Michael has described in the previous slot there. I think it also is right to say that we are strong supporters of the use and uptake of vaccines wherever possible as well. And of course, we encourage farmers in the supply chain to make proactive use of the medicine hub, which I'm sure we'll come back to talk about later in this session. And we also, through our integrated operations, put our money where our mouth is and directly, supply that hub with information from our integrated operations. But of course, our other role is in terms of promoting and celebrating the UK's leadership position on responsible use through our supply chain and helping support customers when they have questions about the UK's relative position. Then clearly having a really good understanding to promote and celebrate the UK's strong position there, then we have a clear role to do that too. But likewise, making sure that we make a positive contribution to continuous improvement. I'll give way there, Kat.
Thank you very much, Phil. Richard, would you like to go next, please?
Thanks, Kat. We're the British Poultry Council, so we're the trade association for the poultry meat producers in the UK. Abby said that the UK produces over 1 billion animals a year. We are the billion. Everything else is the over. So we have a very, very clear picture of our responsibility in this field, and have done and have been working on this since 2011-12. I think our members cover the entire supply chain, right through from primary breeding, right through growing, slaughter, processing. So we have a broad picture of the UK supply chain, and where we sit in it and what our responsibilities are. Our underlying thrust in this area is preserving the efficacy of antibiotics, because that is vital, not just to our industry, but to a national interest. So we've got a clear picture of what we want to achieve. We have had some success, and I'm sure we'll talk about that further in the session. But on a broader scale, I think the work that we've done and we've been able to do, and it's a team effort. In the UK, it's a team effort because we need to work with other sectors through RUMA. We need to work with regulators. So it's really important to have that joint working, but we also have a responsibility in our chain to reach out beyond the UK. Kat, you've mentioned sort of global. Janet is here from a sort of global perspective of McDonald's, but we're also in a position where we can influence our colleagues in other countries and the global industry as well. So we stretch right from the very sort of on-farm work right through to influencing, trying to influence and share best practice on a global scale. I will say one more thing, and this might be a sort of a tease to a future question, Kat. But I think we've learned that we have to be very careful with language and use of antibiotics, and antimicrobial resistance are two different things. One does not necessarily lead to the other. And I'll expand on that later, but that's a core of one of the issues that we're facing. We try and span the whole supply chain, try and work together, but that's our position, Kat.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And then Janet, you're, as I say, we're really delighted to have you joining us from the USA. What's your part in the whole story?
Well, thanks again for the invitation. It's great to be here. As McDonald's, we are a consumer-facing brand, and we have to assure our customers that we're providing them wholesome and safe food. So that's that's why we care about AMR, about antimicrobial resistance, and appropriate use of antimicrobials or antibiotics in the supply chain. We do want to play a part in a positive direction, right? We want to make sure that antimicrobials are used judiciously in the supply chain, because again, we have to provide healthful food to our customers, and we have to be able to do that by not owning any animals, by not owning any farms, just through the policies we put in place with our suppliers and our supply chain. So we have taken a really strong policy to support judicious use principles or responsible use principles, depending on the audience and how we're talking about them. But certainly we have also taken a position to reduce the use of the critical antibiotics. So the highest priority critically important antimicrobials to human medicine has been eliminated from all of our chicken supply chain, as an example of some of the actions we've taken in partnership with our suppliers. We can't do it without our suppliers taking action. And I think, making sure that is sustainable, right? So making sure that we are putting all the other things in place so that animals are healthy, a good diet, access to water, the preventative things, the vaccines, all of that's really important to make sure the animals are healthy as possible before we start relying on antimicrobials and antibiotics to keep them healthy. But we do believe in animal welfare, and we do want a sick animal to be treated. So that's certainly really important to make sure that, we don't have a lot of disease spreading in a barn. We need those animals to be treated whenever possible with products that are safe for the animal and safe for humans. So making sure that we're picking the right product at the right time, administering it at the right dose. Again, we don't own any animals, relying on Richard and his partners, his customers or his members to do the right thing with the chickens. We're relying on Michael to do the right thing with the cow. Hopefully I've captured almost everything for you there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And can I come back to you, Abby? So one of the big themes of this webinar is, of course, the global AMR picture and the UK position. Now, you already mentioned the Fleming Fund in your introduction, but I mean the VMD is really involved in a lot of the big international global initiatives, likes of WHO and those types of collaborations. So could I ask basically for some of your international perspectives and kind of where you think that this whole picture is going globally, internationally, and how we as little small UK, what impact we are having?
Sure, and I think we like to call ourselves a mini powerhouse if we're calling us a small UK, because actually, the reputation that the UK is built by taking action on antimicrobial usage and resistance in animals has earned us respect and influence as leaders in the field globally, and it means we are listened to and we are taken seriously when we engage internationally, which gives us the opportunity and the responsibility to be part of the solution globally, as well as at home, and to keep up the momentum in the One Health space on AMR, which sometimes can feel like a challenge, but actually when we get the right people in the room, we know actually the momentum, the want for the momentum is there. As I said earlier, we're looking ahead to the AMR high-level meeting at next year's UN General Assembly, and we've got a real chance there to influence the international direction of travel, which will then set that out for the coming years. I mean, in case I can cover off actually a couple of the things that we're doing globally, which will sort of show the UK's small but powerful international presence.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning there the Fleming Fund and the UK DHSC, Department for Health and Social Care's Fleming Fund, is the single largest investment in global AMR surveillance, and it partners with the countries, as I said earlier, Africa and Asia, to really bring strong surveillance systems with One Health as the core principle. And it's through these systems that they support the high quality, robust data informing local, regional and national policies. And I think that's where we can have a real influence in a global position. There's about 83 animal health surveillance sites across about 21 countries, which also includes Vietnam in Southeast Asia, in addition to those in Africa I referred to. So the Fleming Fund has a real strength in the international arena. There's also there's lots of acronyms in AMR. It's probably one of the biggest acronym heavy areas that I cover. GAMRIF, which stands for Global AMR Innovation Fund, is another DHSC One Health overseas development aid fund that invests in the innovative One Health antimicrobial resistance research and development to reduce the threat of AMR to human animal health and limit production losses, limit damage to livelihood and the risk to food security in LMIC, low and middle income countries. We also have the UK FAO reference centre. So the reference centre for AMR provides all the sort of the policy and scientific expertise within the global community to tackle antimicrobial resistance in terrestrial and aquatic animals and their environment in a One Health context. And the reference centre focuses on helping low and middle income countries build their capacity for long-term sustainability and resilience. And the designation for that has been renewed until 2027, which is great news. And we hosted the inaugural congress of that reference centre earlier this year, which really reinforced the network of reference centres and identified sort of new areas for collaboration. And there's also another reference centre in Thailand for AMR. What else have I covered? So the other UK role that has been played is in supporting the quadripartite AMR multi-stakeholder partnership platform, AMRPP. I mean, I think the length of these acronyms is increasing and the complexity of them, but that is a global initiative that will help support stakeholders across the whole of the One Health family to collaborate and find solutions to translate global initiatives into local action plans yeah, it has a place to play in amongst all of these other initiatives as well. And obviously, you know, this isn't new, but we've been in Codex for quite some time. So along with the US and the EU and Canada, we play a leading role in updating international guidance through the Codex Alimentarius standards on AMR, which the standards themselves ensure that food is safely traded across the world. And we've been advocating for sort of global adoption of these standards. So there's lots going on in the international space for a very small organisation in what is maybe a very small country, but it doesn't necessarily reflect on the smaller level of influence, because I think the influence is certainly far greater. And what is really positive for me is that it's not generally an uphill battle to have conversations with other nations who want to work in this space, and so where we've got the will and the support through all of these platforms and networks and funds and so on, I think globally we can really make an influential difference.
Right, that was a really brilliant summary. Thank you. I know, I mean, you know, all of us around the Ruma family are very aware of, as you say, the mini superpower that the UK is. But I think hearing it all in, you know, in that nice succinct summary, it really is quite astounding, to be honest. So yeah. And Janet, could I come back to you? And from the USA perspective, what's the USA doing in the same space, or are there other kind of international partners that you're working with, and how is our reputation viewed, and, you know, kind of our involvement viewed from the UK's point of view?
I think the work that Ruma is doing is pretty unique. So McDonald's started on their journey quite a few years ago. I have only been there for a year and a half, but our Vision for Antimicrobial Stewardship started in 2017, and we started collecting data in poultry in 2019. And as we were working through beef and pork data collection, we called Ruma to get some help, right? So that's how I got to know Kat and Chris, in terms of, you know, how can McDonald's do what we need to do to capture this data. So I see the UK as a strong leader in this space. Because as a nation, you're looking at all the animals, if you will, and trying to collect this data and provide it for your consumer. So I would also say that depends on the supply chain, right? So beef and pork, for example, which in the US are not vertically integrated, are very different than collecting data from poultry, which is typically vertically integrated. So we also have to take a step back and look at the supply chain and understand how it operates to get a feel for how can we drive change and make change. But again, you know, when we were working on our beef and our pork policies and trying to work through how are we going to collect data and provide data within our supply chain, we looked to Ruma. So you're definitely a leader. I think Abby mentioned quite a few of the things that the UK and the US do work together on, Codex and other things. I'm not participating in those types of activities as she is, and her organization is, you know, to the same level. But I know we are taking action. You know, we recently passed, over the past 8 years, we changed a lot of the rules around over-the-counter and veterinary feed additives, and across species for the food animals. So in the US, we're doing a better job of reducing use through veterinary feed directives, which is basically a prescription for any feed additive products. And now all of the over-the-counter compounds like penicillin for water is now required to be under veterinary prescription for food animals. So I think it takes, it's always a heavy lift, right? Because you're looking at use patterns as Michael mentioned, you're looking at legislation, and nobody wants to be regulated, so particularly. So how do we help people see the value of all of this data? And I think the value of capturing antimicrobial use data is kind of the secret sauce, because that's where we get the information that helps us drive change. But it takes it's a heavy lift to get that information, as Ruma certainly knows. How's that, Kat? Did I cover all of your?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. And it leads me on, I think, quite nicely to look now to Richard, Phil, and Michael a little bit, bringing it back more to the farmer, kind of food supply chain level. Given all of the investment that we've already made in the UK, how do we make sure that all of that effort, all of the positivity, everything that we're doing doesn't get undermined by products of a lower standard coming into the UK? And by lower standard, I'm not meaning to denigrate any other country. It's more lower standard in terms of AMR, so how they actually use their antibiotics and medicines. Richard looks as if he's ready to go. So Richard, do you want to take this first?
I am, because the comments so far have really sort of got me thinking. And so I would say triggered, but I'm sort of almost there. It's the relationship between a single country, as the UK, and the global environment. We as UK poultry started this, and there were three things that really created the momentum. The first was taking responsibility. Everybody likes to be the master of their own destiny, all sectors and all participants. But that actually became a top-down. So, Kat, you mentioned how it affects sort of individual farmers, but actually the success that we've seen has been driven top-down because it was recognised as a business-critical element. So, taking responsibility, working with key stakeholders. Throughout this, the VMD have been absolutely key on this, and then we've all broadened our horizons with other stakeholders being involved. And the third thing was absolutely crucial, was making it non-competitive or pre-competitive. So we succeeded in doing that from the outset, and that has paid us back in massively. And those principles, we're now seeing those principles being adopted by certainly our global industry. So we're seeing success in our International Poultry Council picking up those principles. But to your point about lower standards, and I've reached that point about lower standards, I think we have to recognise that for this pre-competitive issue, really, really important issue globally, human health, animal health, that we're all on a journey. And no two countries are necessarily at the same point in that journey. So we have to be very careful and very clear about what barriers we put in place here. So yes, there's a commercial impact. Yes, I on the business side, I completely get shouldn't allow lower standards in that shorthand. But if we're taking a responsible position as the UK, we have to manage that, help others manage that process that we've been through to get to a point where those standards, they may be on a slightly different point in the journey, but the standards and the recognition of those standards are the same, equivalent, similar, so that we can actually work with those. it's a very difficult balance. That's not a complete answer to how do we overcome any commercial differences, but I think this is such an important, and it's recognised as such an important subject, that we have to actually be, and I think the UK has done this, be the bigger person in this subject and actually reach out and take our principles and see if they work elsewhere.
Okay, Phil, do you want to?
Thanks, Kat. There's an awful lot to agree with there with what Richard's just said. I think it is worth just reminding ourselves that a lot of brands and food companies themselves will apply their own standards when it comes to sourcing from other countries, and there's a difference between where countries might be and where sourcing regions and blocks within countries might be when it comes to meeting brand standards. It's just kind of a first point to nuance the discussion slightly. I think what Richard is saying is right. I think it does feel that the leadership position that the UK has taken is helping to sort of promote that debate and uptake of responsible use globally. All the initiatives that Abby has already spoken to, and the leadership position that the UK government has taken on this is really widely regarded and respected. And I think what we want to see is not necessarily an exact carbon copy of whatever we're doing in the UK in terms of use being applied elsewhere. I don't think anyone really thinks that's the right approach. The use of antimicrobials should be driven by really good diagnostics and appropriate, targeted, judicious, whatever phrase we might want to use, Janet, use of antimicrobials. That's right and proper for the circumstances, right and proper for the disease challenge in a given country. So I don't think we're in the space of necessarily prescribing what should and shouldn't be used in different countries, but it's really the principles of approach, right? It's really the rumor principles that we're talking about being applied in other countries. And I think everybody through their sourcing, but also through government channels, diplomatic channels, using our soft diplomatic leverage, if you like, to promote those principles being used in other countries has got to be the right way forward. So I understand very well the argument around not wanting to undermine standards, but it's really about promotion of principles and making sure they're taken up. We want them to be taken up proactively. This is a global challenge, and certainly by putting ourselves in silos and trenches isn't necessarily going to help us influence others to take responsible steps themselves. So I think there's an awful lot to agree with what Richard has just said there, but we need to make sure the responsible use principles are the kind of guiding light for us, rather than prescriptive standards in WTO agreements. But those principles should feature as part of our diplomatic efforts, but also our commercial efforts when it comes to sourcing products around the world.
And Michael, from the dairy perspective.
Yeah, I think both Richard and Phil have probably said that most that needs to be said on this one. But I mean, actually representing primary producers who sometimes can look at things from a very simplistic point of view, they'd love to create barriers, or some would, to and protect that USP of where we are on the journey of antibiotic usage. But at the same time, I just come back from Chicago. I was at the International Dairy Federation out there, and antimicrobial resistance was on the agenda of every single country. And as both Richard and Phil have said, everybody's on the same journey. We've had some of our quick wins. It's going to, as I said earlier, it's going to get tougher for us, and those countries are going to come and actually compete with us and actually get to the same level, I guess, over a period of time. And actually, it's about defending the food industry. It's not about protecting UK produce, is it? It's actually a tool that we're going to have to use in the dairy industry globally to sort of defend where we are and just defend that nutritious product that we all produce. And the same with the beef and lamb sector and the chicken sector. So I think it's a tool we're going to all have to use, no matter which country we're in, as primary producers and representatives of producers and processors and food producers going forward. And I think we've got to look at it from that point of view. But it's always a very easy one to to rabble-rouse a bunch of farmers that we're going to build these barriers and protect your market. Well, the reality is it's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. And Janet, is there anything that you feel you particularly want to respond to on this? That
Yes, I just wanted to add a couple of points. As we think about animal health and welfare, this is really what it's about, right? That's why we're talking about the use of antibiotics in the animal space, and recognizing that different countries have different diseases and different risks, and those risks change over time. A U.S. example would be the small original map of where anaplasmosis was located when I was, a baby veterinarian a few years ago, and how that's changed. And now people are getting anaplasmosis, right, in the Northeast. So I think we just also have to be cognizant that the maps are going to change with the changes we're facing as a planet. So if we put too strict of a policy in place, we could be jeopardizing animal health and welfare. We always have to start with, providing a good diet, providing the right vaccines, providing the enrichments that the animals needs to perform at its best. But we still need these tools to preserve the health and welfare of animals.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Abby, I suppose I'll come back to you. There's a couple of things that I think would be good to get your input on. So we're due to see the European SVAC report coming out in a couple of weeks' time, I think, isn't it? Or is it even next week? Certainly kind of sometime in the next 2 weeks. And that's the report that tracks the performance of EU countries on antibiotic use. Now, in the last report, the UK is currently sitting about 7th, I think, within the European table, but that's generally below only countries that don't have the same scale of food production we have in the UK. So I'd be quite keen to understand from you, kind of how you feel about that. But then specifically as well, we're waiting on the outcome of the BMD's consultation on the new UK veterinary medicines regulation. But the EU published its new rule at the beginning of 2022. Clearly, we have a good track record. But will these new EU regulations, will they fast track that European position that Michael talked about, do you think, or what do you think the impact of the kind of the European legal framework will have on the wider picture and on the UK in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. I mean, yeah, obviously the VMR would come into play in this conversation, and the timing of it is such that it is coming. But, let's be honest, it is much later than I would have liked. Many of us would have liked, but we are in a position of being in a parliamentary queuing system effectively. I mean, the VMR, what we want the VMR to achieve on AMR is ultimately to reduce the development and spread of antimicrobial resistance, and to secure the UK's significant achievements in reducing unnecessary use to date. We also want it to support UK vets and farmers who've already adopted responsible antibiotic stewardship practices, and those who are on that journey. And ultimately, of course, the VMR is there to protect public health and animal health and welfare. And back in 2022, the UK National AMR sort of action plan commitment stated that we will implement similar provisions to those on the of antibiotics similar to those in the EU regulation. And as you know, we're not proposing to do exactly the same. We are not proposing to ban group preventative use of antibiotics. Our profile isn't quite the same as the EU's, and yes, we are lower than most other countries. If we're 7th, then fine, but we're lower than all of the European countries which do have the comparably large agricultural sectors like France and Spain and Germany, Netherlands, etc. why we've ended up taking a different approach is basically down to wanting for us to consider the UK's sort of approach and prophylaxis is related to understanding what is happening and how the time that it will take to make improvements in the farming infrastructure and management practices, which when we take into account animal welfare, and there's a new animal welfare, animal sentience committee, I don't know if you are aware of it, which focuses on the impact of policy decisions on animal welfare. And so the blanket banning of group prophylaxis, while changes are being implemented, effectively could be harmful to animal welfare. And if there's an infection or disease on a farm, then improvements to that farm infrastructure and management practices will take time. And banning, therefore, the group prophylaxis while those changes are being implemented could be harmful to animal welfare, because we'd have to wait until they become clinically ill before treating them, which could in turn increase the risk of disease spreading, which obviously in turn subsequently requires higher antibiotic use and increases the risk of AMR developing. So it's a self-fulfilling. So that's why we've taken a slightly different approach to the EU. Yes, our timing is less than initially preferable. Does that mean that we're going to have a different impact? Well, I'm not so sure, actually, because we've seen such significant advances without the legislation in the first place. I mean, 59%, nearly 60%. I think you referred to it at the beginning there, Kat, which is great. We'll use it nearly 60%. It sounds so much better. So we have made all those advances already. And do I see there being a problem with us continuing in that trend? No. We know that some countries are on that steep incline to or decline, actually, I should say, to in terms of reduction in use, and then there is a natural plateauing. So they will follow suit. They will follow the pattern that we have set. But and we have done a lot, but there is obviously still more to do. So I'm not. There is a risk, of course, around new around changes and around how that might impact our trajectories and our intentions. There's many factors involved in it, and not just what the legislation will set out. So it's not something that we consider to be a direct impact, but we'll monitor the situation. Let's just see what happens as more reports will be coming out about the usage. I think, yes, you said it's in a couple of weeks. I'm not entirely sure of the date, probably around then. And keep reacting to what is happening over time, and as we see what the data presents to us.
Okay. Phil, I'm just wondering if there's anything that you want to come back on.
Yeah, just very briefly. I'm conscious that we've only got a small amount of time, really, but just to say that it's really important to pick up on a point that both Janet and Abby have just said there, which is we shouldn't equate just low use with responsible use. To Janet's point about things changing over time and by geography. Sometimes increased use to meet a disease challenge is the right approach. What we want to see is that flexibility to be able to use the right tools in the toolbox at the right time, right? And I think there's perhaps a little bit more to do for us there, which you might come back to later on helping to balance and making sure we've got really good insight on the animal health and welfare outcomes in a country alongside the information that we've got on use as well, because that really helps to give us a more complete picture. Use of its own. It's useful to have that data to give us confidence and insight, but it doesn't also tell us the whole picture. So I don't think we should necessarily be led too much by league tables. We also need to balance it out with health and welfare outcomes, which is the point that Janet said, really, that this is really why we're talking about judicious use here. Consumers rightly expect farmers and vets to be doing the right things by their stock, and we need to help play our part in helping to support that and communicate that. And it's really important that we give them the right signals as well in the right direction to, as I say, to use the right tools at the right time. and make sure we protect as many of those tools as possible to protect efficacy in use, but also protect the other outcomes that we're trying to protect too. So I'm conscious of the time, Kat, so I'll give way on that point.
Yeah, no, I think it was a really useful interjection, Phil, because RUMA has always stood by the policy that we're not in a race to zero, that that responsible use is about still being able to use the right antibiotics at the right time in the right way. So that whole discussion about how low can we go, I think is really quite critical. And there's one thing that I am quite keen to understand that we probably don't hear that much about in the UK, and that was the Muscat Manifesto. So for people who maybe aren't aware of it, it was the third global ministerial conference on antimicrobial resistance, concluded in Oman, I think it was last year, with the issue and publication of the Muscat Manifesto. And it aims to accelerate One Health actions on AMR to achieve the 2050 Sustainable Development Goals. And the first goal of the manifesto is to reduce the total amount of antimicrobials used in the agri-food system by at least 30 to 50% from the current level by 2050. So that's quite an ambitious target across the world. And my question, and again, I'm probably going to have to come to Abby first, I think. How do we respond to that in the UK? We're already, doing really well. We've already come down, to really good levels where we're starting to see that balance being achieved between protecting high welfare and animal health with responsible use. So where do we fit with that global aspiration in the UK?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. I think, well, first of all, to say, we welcome the Muscat Manifesto because setting an aspirational target to drive down to drive that global ambition and commitment towards responsible use. And if you don't know much about it, I can plug that there is a blog by Christine Middlemas, the CVO, which is somewhere on gov.uk. I'm sure you can just type it into the search and it should pop up eventually. But yes, so the question really, 30 to 50%, we're already there. We're above that. We're now, effectively 59%. What does that mean for us? Well, we've effectively achieved what the manifesto is. Sorry, I have a fly buzzing around my head there. What the manifesto is setting out to achieve. But what we can then continue to do is be a supportive global partner for others who are on their own journey to responsible and prudent use of antimicrobials in animals. As I said before, we have done so much, and I think it is absolutely celebrated that we have got to this stage. We're not complacent on that. We shouldn't be complacent on that, and we shouldn't sit back, and we can continue, and we can help take others on that path. And there is the UK, we're championing this FAO Renner Farm. I'm just trying to find out so reduce the need for antimicrobials on farms. It's an initiative, which is a 10-year global initiative, which aims to support countries to achieve a global reduction in antimicrobial use on farms, no matter where they are on their journey to responsible use in agriculture. So there's already things that we are getting involved in championing in order to help that global ambition around the manifesto. Yeah, I mean, basically the manifesto is a tool to sort of help galvanize all the action on AMR in a global scale, and we will also look to the manifesto itself when we're planning new international activity on AMR, where we can help influence in that global environment. But effectively, we are leading the way because we have achieved what the manifesto is setting out to achieve already.
Okay, so a big gold star for UK then.
Absolutely.
Good. What I'd like to hear. And Richard, I'll just come to you. In terms of poultry, as you say, poultry have led the way in terms of UK RUMA targets, how to set up stewardship programs. Looking at other countries though that you have dealings with, that you work with, who have also made significant progress, is there anything that we can learn from those countries, do you think?
I think there's always stuff that we can learn from other countries. And you're right. I mean, I have a problem. I have a slight problem with reduction targets. I can, and I'm going to sort of slight humble brag here. Since 2012, we've reduced overall use by nearly 80%.
Yeah.
And reduction in critically important ones by 98.7%. Great. What does it mean? What does it mean? And a point I sort of slightly referenced earlier was, as a sector, we're not really any closer to understanding the relationship of how AMR develops within the system and the effect of reduction. We all hope, globally, we hope that using less leads to less AMR. We're starting to see issues or areas that we don't understand. So how AMR resistance to antibiotics that we don't even use. How do we understand how AMR moves around? I think, yes, we have to do something, and a target is something, and it gets people moving, gets people thinking. Can we do things differently? Can we improve our practices? Yes, great, but in a sense, reduction targets are short-termism because it's something we can do. It's in our control. I think the next lessons we need to learn, or the next areas we need to really focus into, are the things we don't know, the things that are out of our control, because that's the next. Once we start engaging with that, and I'm sure that there's a lot of research, a lot of very skilled people out there looking at this, but until we can apply some of that to industry and therefore also into human medicine as well, human use and human medicine, I think we're going to come to a little bit of a sort of not quite a grinding halt, but an impasse, in that we've done something and it's great, and we pat each other on the back and it's fantastic. But what's next? I want to know what's next, and I think other countries are having that discussion as well. Okay, we've done something. Livestock production is doing something. What does that mean? What's the next? And I think working together with other countries, I think we've done our bit. I think learning both from countries that are not as far down the journey as we are is important, to see what results they're having, but also sort of engaging with others to say what's next. And that's my big point. What's next?
Yeah, and I think that's, again, I think that's a really useful and thought-provoking comment. I know certainly within Ruma, we've always tried to do things that are very science and evidence led. And as you say, Richard, in the whole picture of AMR, there is an awful lot that the science is scrabbling to catch up. So quick plug for Ruma, we have our independent scientific group, and we've been really delighted to take on Professor Pete Borriello as our new independent chairman of that group, and the amount of knowledge and critical scientific thinking that he is going to add to that group, which was already full of hugely influential, kind of expert people in their field, and they come from academia, they come from medical science, they come from the veterinary profession. They're already a big group of intellectual heavyweights. So I think this is one of the things that Ruma has recognised, that so what question is rapidly coming down the line, and we need to try and answer it. So kind of, I think Yeah, I think you were very right to raise that question, Richard. Michael and Phil, do either of you want to come in and say anything further on this, or shall I move on? I
Happy for you
think.
to move on.
Okay, Phil, what about you?
Just very briefly, I think it's, you know, the short answer to the question is that we don't know how low we can go, and I think getting more insight and evidence to help support what we do next, as Richard describes, and making sure we have the right science. One thing the industry does have control of is making sure it does a really good job of providing really good evidence, which includes of use. But also, as I say, thinking about next steps in terms of how we monitor health and welfare outcomes as well has got to be part of that debate, and part of our thinking in interventions and next steps. And certainly, I think within at least within an English context, and potentially in other devolved administrations, we can think about how the pathway can help us. The animal health welfare pathway can help us. The DEFRA supported initiative to support veterinary health planning on farm has got to be a potential vehicle for us to do some of that work, and that is something that is directly within our collective control, and hopefully the scientific fraternity and sorority can help us decide what the next step should be in our journey. But it feels intuitively right that we should try and reduce as much as possible in concert with continuous improvement in animal health and welfare outcomes. And we'll look to hear the best science and evidence coming out of the forums like RUMA, but also from signals from government and other academic institutions to help guide us further forward.
Okay, I'm going to slightly change tack a little bit now, and present a theme for discussion around affordable food and those necessary compromises. We've talked slightly about, that balance being reached, but we all know that it's really important as an industry and as food producers that we can provide healthy food at a range of price points, and the current cost of living crisis makes that ever more prevalent in everyone's mind at the minute. So we need to, though, make sure as well that we meet consumers' expectations on cost, welfare, climate, environmental impacts, and, as I say, all at the right price point. That's surely the holy grail for everyone. So, Janet, I'm going to come to you and ask, from your perspective, how can that holy grail be achieved? And what are the implications, do you think, for responsible medicine use?
So thinking about how we can achieve reduced use and good welfare, we also have to start on the farm, right? So Phil already mentioned that good husbandry is really critical to this. And we found that too. We have a database of our chicken supply chain, looking at antibiotic use and key welfare indicators, a range of indicators. There's 15 that I have access to. And really, stockmanship is the number one thing that really is helping us reduce use over time. And it's the number one driver of welfare outcomes from my perspective with the type of data I have access to. So empowering farmers to have the knowledge that they need to be successful, and then giving them the tools when they need them so that they can improve the health of the animals that are under their care, I think is really important. And again, I don't own any farms, but I have access to a ton of data. If we can keep the litter clean and dry for chickens, we see an improvement in the key welfare indicators related to foot or hock burns. So definitely, certainly want to keep the farmer kind of front of mind as we work through these difficult questions. I'm sorry. If there's so many things to talk about, it's easy to get derailed.
Yes.
I think that's a good start. I can jump back in.
Okay, no probs. So, Phil, I think we might come to you, and then I haven't heard from Michael for a while, so I might come to Michael after Phil.
Thanks, Kat. I would just reiterate a little bit of what I said before about good stockmanship and really good management on farmers being the kind of key lead for driving health and welfare outcomes, but also economic performance as well, right? And responsible use goes hand in hand with that. I don't recognise a link necessarily or trade-off between price or cost of production and responsible use at all. But I do think it's right and proper that consumers should expect responsible use in all types of systems and all profiles of systems as well. So I don't think there's a trade-off here. I think responsible use and driving health and welfare outcomes is something that all farmers in all types of systems can do very well with good management and stockmanship.
Okay. And Michael?
Yeah, I think Phil's hit it on the head, and Jana. Stockmanship is key. And while I was in the States last week, I visited some farms. One with 36,000 cows on 5 units over on one block of land, and the welfare was second to none. I could take you to similar, but in smaller units. A couple of thousand cows in the UK, and the welfare is second to none. It's about the ability for farmers to be able to turn a profit actually and invest and actually take the business forward, whether that's extensive or intensive. And actually, lack of profitability of businesses puts pressure on every part of the business, ultimately. And I think that, most farmers, all farmers, I would say, actually want to do the right thing for their animals, whatever sector they're in. But it isn't about intensive against extensive. I've actually reduced cow numbers slightly, partly due to the economics of dairy in the UK at the moment. And I've seen some benefits from that. And it's getting that balance right. It's sometimes we run too fast to stand still as primary producers. And sometimes, you've just overstepped the mark a bit by stepping back a little bit. Actually, the business is better and everything tends to run a little bit better. But sometimes that's driven by the financial pressures of where we are. So I think, profitable businesses will reinvest, will actually, constantly improve the standards of housing and accommodation for their livestock. And we've seen that over the years. I came to this farm sort of 30 odd years ago, and I wouldn't put a cow in the accommodation that I came into 30 years ago now. It's very, very different. And that would be the same for many of our farms. But it's about getting that balance right, I would say, so that we have food affordable at all price points with high welfare standards.
Yeah. And Richard, as the representing the producers of the billion animals, do you have anything to add or that you want to join in with on this?
No, I think the principles that have been set out there, I think, are absolutely right. They apply across sectors. Some of it comes back to this cannot be a competitive subject. It cannot be, and if you allow it to be, it'll ruin the, perhaps hyperbole. It'll ruin the progress we've already made. But that'll undermine